All right, so welcome everybody. Small group tonight, but those usually are the best.
All right.
So we're talking about the creation and how not only the creation as we know it and as we live in it, but as to the act of creation itself. And we we have to recognize that the Bible is not just a book of guidance, but it's also a book of principles. It's how creation works. So it's a book of metaphysics as well. And the best way to know God is by knowing ourselves. And the way we know our mind, the way that we see how things come to being in our life, how we create things. We know that whatever we dwell upon, that that will tend to come into manifestation. And the Bible knows this too, and it gives us in mythical form ways in which we can understand how these processes work. And the best key is in the book of Genesis, of course, which is really all about the act of creation. And it says, um, God said, "Let there be light." And this is echoed in the New Testament in the Gospel of John, where he says, "In the beginning was the Word." So we have the Word and we have God said. And so we want to pay close attention to what we say and actually what it means to say. What does that mean? What is our use of our words? And to realize that we not only speak with our voice, but that we speak with our mind, that we're continually broadcasting into our lives specific instructions, how we want our lives to be. And this often comes about in ways of what we accept, uh, what we are, what we look for, uh, what we expect. So if we expect good things to happen, then that programs our brain to look for the good things. It programs our brain to tend more towards gratitude, away from fear, and towards opportunity, because we're either looking to get away from something dangerous or we're looking to move towards something that's advantageous. So in Genesis, this is kind of cutely hidden in the verbiage. It says, "And God saw that it was good." So this is where we want to focus in our lives on the good, because we're wired to detect both good and evil. And in fact, in CogSci, they're talking about how we're way more wired towards detecting threat than we are to detect opportunity. And there's good reason for that, because
Yeah.
if there's a lion in your
Right.
path, uh, and there's also a berry bush, you want to be more attentive to the lion than you are to the berry bush, right? Both are stimuli. One's an opportunity and one is not. So so we can easily see how evolution has set us up so that we survive. We're going to survive, and we can go without food for 30 or 40 days and sometimes even longer, but we can't exist very long in the presence of a predator beast. So that's easy to see. So we've got this natural instinct to be on the lookout for what's dangerous. And then if something good comes along, we're only, obliquely uh, predetermined to check it out. And even when we see something good, usually our first reaction is to see if maybe there's a hidden threat within that good. So really, we're working against instinct. The body wants to recoil, but we have to override that instinct. And the first step in overriding it is to know about it. It's to know that that exists, and that we can learn to let that pass through us and not disturb our natural, our natural tendency, because it's also a natural tendency to seek the good.
Hmm.
So this is kind of a basic principle of creation, of creating a life. We often hear people say, you need to create a life, create the life that you want. And so the way we envision our lives has extraordinary power on how our lives will unfold, because it's that we offer it kind of a negative pole. We offer it a vacuum to fill, and our thoughts and our emotions, our desires, our our concepts all work together to create the same shape hole in potential for the creative forces of the universe to fill. So if we have a vision of our life that is predicated on danger, then we'll always be in danger, because we're going to always be looking for danger, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out that what we look for, we tend to find. It's like when you talk to somebody, if you have a negative opinion of them, you're going to look for things that reinforce your opinion of that person. And therefore, that person would become more and more the way you imagine them to be. And this, of course, is ignorance in the way that Buddha used the word. And ignorance is one of the chief causes of suffering. On the other hand, if we look to each other with the intention of providing an opening for them to reveal the good that's in them, then that good will naturally start to flower, because life seeks sunlight, and our attention is sunlight. What we put our attention on, it's the same as shining sunlight onto it. And all life responds to sunlight. So in seeking light, the way we use the word, we're not using it as a metaphor, we're using it as a scientific reality. And that on the spiritual plane, what we put our attention on is the same as shining a light on it. And what is put, and then, and you might say that life is, if anything, is potential. It's the potential of a thing. All living things have the desire to unfold the fullness of their potential. All living things want to become the best version of themselves. And by best, I mean the most complete version of themselves. They want to step into their power. They want to step into their ability and to blossom, to unfold, so that not only can each living thing come to know itself, but it can come to know the place in which it lives. Because that's just as important, because we know of ourselves as we enter into relationship, not only with each other, but in the place that we are. So we want to open up to what's actually here, and not just the filter through which we look at the world. And that filter is what we expect to see. We filter everything according to what we expect to see. Therefore, we wind up seeing only a fraction of what's here. So you hear Easterners talking about getting, achieving stillness of mind and to get the ego out of the way. And I think that it's as good a working definition for the ego to say that it is our preconceptions which govern and rule our expectations. So part of becoming a creative agent in the world, which is the way God created us, because we're created in God's image, God is a creator. So part of becoming a creative agent is to manage our expectations. And I don't mean that in the way that people usually say that. They say, if you're not getting what you want, just lower your expectations. And that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that, can you shape your expectations on purpose? Can you deliberately form your expectations with and turn the dial of potential all the way up, so that when you look at something, especially a living thing, let's say a tree, when you look at a tree, it no longer is an inert object. It's no longer, a semi-alive thing. It becomes a locus, a location of enormous potential. And in really looking into the center of the tree, and I don't mean, like at the core of the wood part of it. I mean looking into the center of the thing itself. You see, because what we see is just the visible representation of the thing itself. So looking into the core of anything, especially a living thing, we find that it's a point of being. And that point of being has a spiritual dimension to it. That spiritual dimension has to do with really the way God created it as a potential living thing. And the way we see it and the way it gathers the elements of the earth is incidental to the earth. Because if there was another planet with a conducive environment, but entirely different to this one, that tree would adapt to that environment, that new environment, and it would extend itself into an entirely different physical form, but it would be the same tree. Because the essence of the tree is not the physical form. The essence of the tree goes way deeper, and it has its roots in pattern, in patterns of geometry, patterns of number, But those things in themselves are really inadequate to describe it. They describe the form that the tree takes, but it does not describe the spirit of the tree. So I'm using an easy example of a tree because, they're all around us and easy to see and easy to connect to if you try. But where it leads to is the tree that we are, because we have that same vertical dimension that we extend ourselves into. Just like a tree, we root ourselves in the earth, but we reach for the stars. We respond to the sun, which is to say we respond to it attention. So we have this vertical axis that we have that's why we stand upright. It's what makes us different than the animals in the animal kingdom. We stand upright. And that in our spinal cord is like the tree. It grows upward. And it has the crown of the brain.
And the
And it
bottom
has
of it.
yes, and the roots into the earth. And it has the center, the process where earth and heaven meet, which is where the heart of the tree is. We even call it the heartwood. So we have to see creation differently if we're going to be participators in it. We can't be co-creators and sleepwalk through the world, because we live in a world that is entirely alive. And it's in our engagement with that life that we come to know ourselves. And as we come to know ourselves, we come to know God. And we begin to realize that God has a mental component that is almost 100%. That the way that some people say, well, this life is an illusion. And in a sense, they're right, but not really in the sense that they mean, because when they say it's an illusion, they say it's not real. And just because we see it a particular way doesn't mean that there's not a reality that underpins it. What we see is a very limited part of what it is. So that's why they call it an illusion. Now, it's also important to remember that the way physical matter arranges itself is not, the power that arranges it is not located in this world. That there is a power that is behind this world, so to speak. It's like when you go into a physical object such as a tree, you begin to see that core, that center of the tree has no dimension. It is not a three-dimensional thing. That the very center of the spiritual part of anything has 0 dimension. That means it's infinitely small. And what this turns out to be is a gateway. When we go into that infinitely small point, like the circle with the dot in the center, this is the most ancient symbol for God. It couldn't be more real, which is what makes symbols and not just signs, right? They have a reality to them. When we go into that center, we find that we pass through into kind of a different dimension. And that different dimension is everywhere, and yet it's nowhere, because it is so entirely different. You know, when you talk about three dimensions, you have a line, and then you have another line that's perpendicular to that line, and then you have another line that's perpendicular to both of those. And that gives us the XYZ axes. This is the fundamental form of the physical world. Now try to imagine a fourth line that is perpendicular to all of those. You can't do it. We're not set up to see that. We're not set up to visualize that. And people have ways to do it mathematically and schematically, but they're all always approximations. They're like shadows of what they're trying to describe. But as we go into that, and we have that ability, this is the divine part of us. This is the part of us that transcends the mind itself. Not the divine mind, because the divine mind is something pretty different than how we identify our mind. As we identify our mind with conditions and facts and memories and conjectures and logical thinking. God's mind is different in that it exceeds all of those. But since we are so accustomed to dealing with the mind that we know, it's very difficult to perceive the mind of God. But the way we do that is by going into the center. And we can practice that by either going into the center of external things, or we can practice it by going into the center of ourselves. And either way, it works. Either way, when you go into the center of a thing, you pass through into the mind of God. And then everything is quite different. Then we can see that the origin of things in this world do not come from this world. And that if you know the origin of a thing and you trace it back to its origin, any effect that you have on that origin will change the physical form of the thing in this domain. Now, this is where people get really caught up in wondering about the stories of Jesus and whether or not he did the things that the Bible said that he did. You know, did he rise from the dead? We just came through the Easter season, and that's the question on everybody's mind. Did he rise from the dead? Did he walk on the water? Did he restore limbs that weren't there, or eyes that couldn't see from birth? Could he restore their vision? And in that case, could he create vision in an eye that was blind, that had never known sight? So, and we have the tendency to say, no, those are metaphors. Those are symbolic representations of spiritual principles, and they are. But everything is a spiritual principle. And everything comes into creation from a place that is not of this world. So any mastery of the world that is transcendent of this world, it's within this world, within the center of this world, of all things in this world. God is the center that is everywhere and the circumference that is nowhere. When we enter into that space, then we begin to learn how things come into creation and how we are related to that process. And we begin to see that most people, including ourselves most of the time, have no clue about how this creation works. We have science, and science now is pushing the boundaries of the physical world, and they call it quantum reality. They talk about an underlying reality to this one, the same way that the mystics talk about it. And if you think about it at all, you begin to wonder, are they not talking about the same thing? Only they have different words for it. And in religion and mysticism and all the sacred scriptures, those are pre-scientific languages. And I don't mean just the language of like Sumerian or Egyptian or Sanskrit, not languages like that, but languages, like the way numbers are a language, the way movement is a language. When we go into those areas, we begin to see that there is a language to creation. And that language is symbolism. But then again, going back to what I said before, a symbol is not a sign. A symbol has power. A symbol like the circle with the dot in the center, you can begin to see how that's like a magnifying glass. A magnifying glass is a circle with a center also, but it does something. If you take it outside in the sun, it's going to collect the sun's rays, and it's going to heat something up to the point where it bursts into flame. So a symbol is like a mental equivalent of that. If you configure mass or matter in a certain way, like glass in a convex form of the metal frame, and you use it as a magnifying glass, you're going to get a certain result when you work it a certain way, which is to align it with the sun and focus it on an object. So what we want to be aware of with symbols is that they work in the mind the same way that physical objects that have a function work in the physical world. So, and there are principles involved. Like you can take a square, and we realize, okay, a square is a man-made configuration. It doesn't really occur in nature, not a perfect square. This is something we make, but a square has great stability to it. That's why we build houses in squares. That's why cars have 4 wheels. So we can identify principles of physics in that, principles of balance, principles of inertia and momentum, things like that. And so, but there's something that transcends the principle part of it. And this is where it gets very difficult to describe, because you can look at a square without any cognition going on, without thinking about it. You can just look at a square and it will activate something in you. It will activate forces of the mind that are deeper than where you live. They activate that part of the mind which is transcendent to this world. That part of the mind that lives in that 4th dimension from which all things derive their being. So people ask you, or if you ask yourself, did Jesus do those things? The honest answer is we don't know. We don't know. So we don't see people doing that now. But because we don't see things like that being done now, as a range of possible reasons. And one of the reasons being we don't know how to do those things. And that's why we're not seeing them. Another possible reason is that those people who do know how sure as hell aren't going to show you. It just won't. For a whole nother raft of reasons. because people who tend to do those things tend to die before their time. So there are lots of reasons why we don't see these kinds of phenomena, and there are lots of reasons why, even if we develop those kinds of abilities ourselves, why we don't show anybody. So, but the tendency of the world mind, which is the mind we use, is to just discount those things because there's no evidence for them. Well, there are lots of things that there's no evidence for. And it wasn't that long ago, just a few decades, when there was no evidence for lasers. There was no evidence for microchips. I think you get my point. So what we're looking at in terms of creation, and that's what we're talking about here, is the act of creation, not just the world, but the act of bringing the world into being. What we're looking at is how that works, where that comes from, how it grows, and how it comes into fullness, and how those processes are the way we are formed, that we grow, not just our physical bodies, but our character and our minds and our feelings and our awareness, how all of that grows, how that comes into being, and then how it comes into its own fullness of its realized potential. All of these things are told in cryptic form in the Bible, through stories, through accounts of miracles, accounts of the trajectory of a person's life. And all of these things are designed to trigger within us, to call forth from within us, the same way a square that when we look at it activates something in us. These stories activate something in us. They put something into motion that wasn't there before, a possibility. So this is why we practice contemplation, which is a very subtle way of thinking that we kind of capture in the word entertain. When we say we entertain an idea, that's a very delicate procedure. It's not a it's not the action that we take when we analyze an idea, because there we actively try to take it apart, reduce it to its component parts, and see how those parts work together logically. And when I say parts, in the context of an idea, ideas have parts. They have like balance points within each other. You know, an idea can have like a form. It can have a square form, it can have a circular form, it can have a triangular form. So when we contemplate, what we're doing is the same thing that we do when we take a form like that and we let it work on us. We don't work on it. We don't try to figure it out. We let it reveal itself to us. This is why so often when you wake up, a problem you've been working on suddenly presents a solution or a number of solutions. It's because we let go of it and we let it work on us, and it drew something out from within us, from that higher state of mind that is not part of the world mind. So these are all parts of the topic of creation. And it's would like you to take away from this is that the Bible, being the story of creation, it's often referred to that way, especially the book of Genesis, that it's not just a record of something that happened. It's a handbook of a process. But not just like a scientific manual is a handbook of a process, very much the same, but dealing with a dimension that transcends the world that science writes manuals for. So what we're looking at when we read something like the Bible or the other sacred texts are not designed to give us an idea or a concept. They're designed to draw reality out from us. They're designed to produce within us a realization, a dawning of awareness, a blossoming, a coming forth, a shoot, a growing up and out, something that comes from within itself. That's what scripture is for. That's why when you say the Our Father, for instance, you don't even have to know what it means. You don't have to analyze the words as you say it. And if you try, you find that something very fulfilling and something very important is taken away from it. So that's what I want to leave you with, to contemplate those things, to take these concepts and let them work on you and let them find a place in you so that what's really within you can come forth. And what comes forth from within you comes from God, doesn't come from the mind of this world, comes from a transcendent place. So I'll open it up now for questions. Anything you'd like to talk about, as long as it's about this.
Oh, thank you. That was incredibly well articulated.
Well, thanks, Eli. So can we come up with any ideas or any ways that we could use this? Being practical the way we are?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
So just taking those basic shapes one at a time, dedicating attention and contemplation, meditation, and just holding that only one form in the mind, and like you said, allow it to work on us and then see what comes forth from that, and do one at a time. Note without expectation, because we don't know what's going to come forth from it, right? But
Right.
we're trusting something's going to, and um we've made it this far, so something's obviously supporting us to be here and have this conversation. Um, so it'll be a very interesting, and looking forward to doing that. And I know there's a story that says, I think it's a Rosicrucian origin, that says that in a very, very long time ago, in our concepts of time, that higher beings of much greater intelligence than developing humanity presented the basic shapes to them, and they would actually literally physically expose them to the triangle and the square and the circle, and they did this over time to I'm talking probably in Rosicrucian teachings, it's way further back than we have, in our modern typical history
Yeah.
uh, classrooms of modern education. But anyway, the point is that doing this so long ago allowed humanity to develop the abstract mind, or if you wish, to have access to what we call the abstract mind.
Yes.
And and something I find fascinating personally is how we still do that today with our children. And we just call them little games, but it's always exactly put this little triangle in this little sphere with the triangle shape, and put this cube in this cube shape. And we still do that. It's a universal thing that still is occurring for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Interesting.
know, one of the things that cognitive science that they've been working on, especially in young children, is setting up a sound in a nursery that is not quite rhythmic. It may have an anomaly in the pattern, and it's enough of an anomaly to pique the interest of the child. And they're thinking that this is how kids learn language so well. In that they, if something is anomalous that doesn't fit a predictable pattern, the whole brain wants to figure it out. So the
Mm,
brain rallies its own forces to
mm.
figure out what's going on here. And in that effort, the brain grows and it expands into its potential.
Interesting.
So it's like stimulus, but it's understanding what stimulus is. I remember for the longest time they were talking about uh, playing Mozart for kids,
Mm, mm.
and then they discovered that the patterns in Mozart's music tended to match patterns in wave function of the brain. So they would do like an EEG and see certain patterns, and then discovered that Mozart's music was analogous to that. So they would play Mozart to kids, and it would really, really grab their attention,
Mm.
because that's like the whole spirit of the child, is to know its surroundings, it's to know the world. And so the more variation you can give the child, then the faster and the more intricately the brain develops.
Yeah, that makes sense. I
Yeah.
was, yeah, they do that. I think they've shown that with mice also. If they give them more stimulus of all kinds, that their their neural connections form much faster, right?
Yep, that's right. So
Cool.
this is one way that we can apply this to ourselves. And one of the best ways to do that is to question our own assumptions. Is to call our own beliefs into question. And that's really hard for the mind to do. It can be so bad at times that we have a term for it now called cognitive dissonance. That if something is too big a leap, the brain shuts down and cannot see it. It's not that we refuse to see something entirely new, it's that we can't see something entirely new. So the goal or the task of the teacher then is to maneuver the student by degree, into gradual perspectival variation. Move a person's way of seeing the world in a gradual, incremental way, so that the brain can adjust incrementally to a new perspective. It's not easy. So this is why we don't condemn people who have spiritual or religious beliefs different from our own, that You know, we may think that they're primitive because we're so smart, you know, and so perceptive and spiritual, and they're so stupid. They are working through a part of their mindscape that we may have no clue what that is. In fact, somebody may be working with principles and perspectives that we think are highly undeveloped, but that person may be far more intelligent than we are. But they're working through a particular perspective. So which is more important, the perspective or the intelligence? You see, we don't know.
Right. We don't know.
We
There's no
we
way.
tend,
How could we know?
yeah.
I mean, it reminds me of that movie. Remember the Defending Your Life
Oh yeah.
movie? Or
Yeah.
Rip Torn. He's late for his meeting with the guy, and he's like, "Where you been?" He's like, "You wouldn't understand." He's like,
You wouldn't
"Oh, come
understand.
on, tell him." He's like, "No, really, you wouldn't understand." Oh, come on. He's like, "Okay," and then he tells him something crazy. He's caught on the rim of something, blah blah, and then he's like,
I think it was something like the the outer rim of doubt or something like that.
yes, like that. It
Yeah.
was good. It was really well
Yeah.
done, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good. Yeah. If you want another movie that's a mind bender, check out Made in Heaven.
Okay.
It has Timothy Hutton and the woman who played in the first Top Gun.
Uh-huh.
You know, forget her name offhand, but she was in it. And then there's another actor in it that no one knows, no one knew at the time the identity of this person. Played a major
Really?
role in the movie, but nobody knew the
Oh,
identity. But it was a
that's
famous
great.
actor. It was a famous actor.
Really?
And there wasn't a lot of makeup either.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So Made in Heaven is MADE, as in marriages made in heaven.
Huh?
So this
Uh,
couple falls in love in heaven and then comes back to earth, you know, that kind of thing.
uh-huh.
It's a cute story, but
Okay.
there's some real profound truths in it.
All right. I might just check it out.
Yeah, yeah,
It sounds like a good weekend movie.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Thank you.
Well, okay, guys. Unless you have anything you want to add or question or anything, then I think we covered this.
Thank you so much. You're making my mind work again, which is
Oh,
good.
good.
It's a good thing.
We want to draw you out.
All right.
Thank you. Interesting.
Yeah, as always, it's my pleasure. It's really, really fun meeting with you and talking about these things.
Yeah. That was excellent. Thank you, Michael. Have a great weekend. You too, Marlo.
You too. Bye-bye.
All right.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.